Okay, I think we're live on Facebook.
Hello.
Hopefully that's working. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching and tuning in. Brian Welch here, candidate for the Leon County Commission District 4 seat. And I have, yep, I just got a notification on my phone that we are live on Facebook. So that is awesome. I have the privilege tonight of speaking with Miss Gloria Arias, who is a resident of Killearn Estates and also happens to be on the Killearn Homes Association board. And this is kind of an ongoing I apologize for some of the problems we've had with our Facebook Lives. I had one last week with Liz Eck, and it was just me talking to the screen because I am trying to troubleshoot this technology myself. Excuse me. But this is the ongoing Zoom town hall series that I'm trying to do with residents of our neighborhoods, because one of my big campaign issues has been communication with our neighbors and how I feel like we don't always get the best communication from our elected officials. And so our Zoom town hall series is an opportunity to speak with folks and hear from them directly about the issues they think are important to their neighborhoods and our broader Northeast community. So again, tonight, I am with Miss Gloria Arias. Gloria, would you like to take a few minutes and tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to Killearn Estates and your experiences living in one of Tallahassee's, legendary legacy neighborhoods? I think it's our first master plan, or one of our first master plan
It
communities.
is.
So
You've done
please.
your homework, and you
Yeah.
know that, and I really appreciate that. Yes. Okay. So I've lived here since 1996, but yes, let me give you some history about Killearn Estates and why the residents are so passionate about preserving this half a century-year-old mature subdivision from
Yeah.
and that supports the concerns and issues that we have. So Killearn Estates was, you're correct, one of the, if it was the first planned community, mixed use community in this area, if not the state, back in 60, mid to late 60s, when it was first began development, and with underground utilities, no less. So, we have larger single family homes with zero lot lines, apartments, condominiums, retail, places of worship. So 10 parks, including four of them have playgrounds. So, we are a mixed use and well diversified subdivision out here. And so what also makes us unique are our lavish, mature trees that, that dot the area. So we're 4,000 acres large, 3,800 property owners with about a population of 12 to 13,000 people. So that's the beginning of it. So in the nutshell, I guess, do you have any questions about that?
Well, I was going to say, you said you moved here in 1996. I moved here in
did.
1997. When you moved to Tallahassee, what made you want to live in Killearn Estates?
Oh, I couldn't think of any place else to live. The convenience of it all, the beauty of the mature landscaping, the convenience to I-10. I could literally put a backpack on my back and walk to Walgreens, Books A Million, the bank, grocery stores. I could even hike it to the cleaners and Southern Seafood if I wanted to get a really good workout.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
for all of those reasons, and I like the fact that Killearn Estates residents have natural amenities that encourage us to be outside. We have bridle trails that are no longer used for horses because that section of the stables was developed into residential. But people utilize the bridle trails more and more and more. And people walk and jog and visit their neighbors on the corner and, for all those reasons. And that's why traffic and traffic safety is such a big issue for us. And all right, so I finished building my house that I still live in today in 1996. And I was greeted with the 4-laning of Killarney Way as a big, great project that was going to happen in tandem with the 4-laning, the increased size of Thomasville Road.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first battle that the residents quickly assembled and rallied to sue the city, go to mediation, and reduce that to, a 3-lane at the mouth of Killarney Way and Thomasville Road, because a 4-lane divided highway as you enter Killearn Estates For one thing, it would make it really difficult for the children on one side of the street to get across basically 5 lanes of traffic to get to their school bus with no assistance. So it's always been about safety. It's not a NIMBY issue, it's a safety issue. You know, anybody, especially our seniors, should be able to step off their curb and open the mailbox without fear of being mowed down by somebody who's running late someplace. So increasingly, with the development of the Northeast Quadrant, which we're all a part of, and that district that you're running to represent, it's become increasingly clear that the city and the county have growing problems, and they are challenged with protecting the canopy roads. But our neighborhood and any neighborhood cannot be sacrificed for growth. It shouldn't be that kind of a swap out. They should have some kind of long range. I'm not an elected official. I'm not a planner. I'm not a traffic engineer, but there has to be some long-term thought given to how everybody can coexist together without destroying one or the other. I'm all for property rights, and people should be able to develop their property, but not at the expense of drastically harming somebody else, not in a civilized society anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think, you know, it's interesting because Killearn Estates was developed in late 60s.
That's when it started, yeah.
And it was the first real big sort of like you said, multi-use neighborhood, master plan, big roads, incorporating a golf course and a country club. And, and at the time it was considered way far out. I don't know exactly how many miles it is. I think it's like 6 to 8 miles from the capital. I mean, at the time people were like, there's no way anyone's going to want to live way out there. And now here we are, 50 years later, and we are still experiencing tremendous growth, tremendous desire to move to Northeast Tallahassee. So Killearn Estates, a 50-year-old community is still, 50 years, is still dealing with the same problems of, everybody wants to move out to Northeast Tallahassee. And I mean, I think that in and of itself is kind of an indictment of how Tallahassee has grown without much consideration for kind of keeping it concentric and creating some balance with how we grow. The county's kind of all balanced, lopsided to the Northeast, and that's created the problems that you guys in Killearn Estates are experiencing today, 50 years later.
Yeah, and so once we succeeded in keeping the 4-laning away from Killarney Way, in 2016, there was something introduced. The Killearn Corridor was the option of choice for reducing traffic on Thomasville Road south of Bannerman to just south of I-10. And that would include a 4-laning of Shamrock, a divided 4-laning of Shamrock, and utilizing the Cary Forest roundabout, the Killarney Way and Shamrock roundabout, and out in Raymond Deal and to Olson. That was going to be the efficient way to move lots and lots of AM drive timers through a 30-mile-an-hour residence with 2 roundabouts. Nobody came to our aid. We had nobody to help us. So we had to find this out kind of on our, they did make one presentation, and of all the 5 options, this was the pick. So when I spoke about it, I said, well, does Bobby Bowden know that his pylons are going to be removed? Because if we're going to 4-lane Shamrock West, his front yard is gone.
Right.
So Mayor Daley and County Commissioner Daley motioned to absolutely do not do that. And City Commissioner Scott Maddox seconded it, and we killed it. But I was told every 5 years, you're going to be primed for being the solution to the growing pains of traffic out here. So then that leads us to the Northeast Gateway. And I know you had a meeting with a town hall with Danielle Irwin and Steve Givens, my fellow board directors, and they went into much detail about all that. So I won't cover that again, but we thought it was finally to rest with agreeing to the option of extending Wilani Boulevard north to Roberts Road and a 2-lane rural spur to Shamrock. The numbers actually showed great reduction on some of our streets, opening both of them. And everybody thought, let's give a little for the greater good. Some personal private property up the road was going to have a corner clip of their property dedicated. we would have the Shamrock, someone else was going to give something up in Bannerman, and we'd all do it for the growth and the enjoyment of the Northeast. We were a pretty large subdivision, so there's an advantage to some people that live closer to Centerville as a convenience for them to get out. So we try to look at it holistically and not individual home sites and where we were located, whether to be for or against it. So we thought we negotiated in the spirit of good faith and came to a final conclusion. It doesn't seem to be that the case though. So we had to extend the contracts of our outside consultants. And now there's something that's related to the Northeast Gateway called the Wulani Master Plan.
Mhm.
There was modeling done on the Northeast Gateway through 2045. And the negotiated agreement was based on those numbers. What was introduced in September tripled that. That
Mhm.
can't help but affect our traffic. And it's hard to think that the roads are going to be consistent and compatible with all of the neighboring residences and neighborhoods as they spread, as the growth spread and the development spreads out. Simultaneously, coincidentally, let me just add this one thing.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, when that triple density was introduced, it was held at a meeting simultaneous with a blueprint meeting that we were already scheduled to speak to, because they were going to introduce an option that was kind of a surprise option that eliminated Roberts. So we couldn't be in both meetings at the same time.
Mhm.
So we had 3.5 weeks to scramble and figure out how do we try to introduce a pause of this triple density that
Right.
we just found out about.
Yeah, I mean,
That
it's been in the
failed.
news a lot, and it's been, I think it's when I say I want to balance growth and sort of protect the interests of our established neighborhoods, it's things like this where our current county commissioner says, "Oh, well, this has been in the pipe for a long time. This density change." Well, I think it was first mentioned about 3.5 weeks ago. And now all of a sudden, we've effectively tripled the densities in the Wulani area master plan from 1 million square feet of commercial to 3 million square feet of commercial. And we've gone from 4,500 homes to 12,000 homes. And I think if people really put that into perspective, like we just mentioned, Killearn is 4,000 acres and 3,800 homes. I mean, 12,000 residential units, you're talking about apartment complexes and very tight lot lines. And I mean, it's just, you can understand the fear and the concern of folks in Killearn Estates, especially after y'all had to sort of employ your own traffic engineers and do your own traffic studies to try and determine if the traffic that was already being proposed was going to potentially be detrimental to you. So I think it's, we talk about overdevelopment and developers kind of getting what they want. I think, like you said, Gloria, we all recognize that we have to grow. Tallahassee has to grow. We're going to have to build more houses, but we have to be balanced. The scales cannot be tipped in the favor of just a carte blanche to development interests, and they can do whatever they want. And then when we go through the planning process, with the Wulani area, with the Northeast Gateway, the road itself, we went through a series of charrettes where staff put together, sort of wrote on a big map with some Sharpies and said, well, this is a good idea. What do you think? And people weighed in. And then they come out with this crazy proposal to dump the Northeast Gateway, like near McLaughlin's, near Roberts Elementary School and stuff. And I'm like, and that got everybody's concerns up. So I think that this kind of, from what I understand, this process in terms of altering the comp plan and putting together this Wulani area master plan has not been the same as it has always been. And that's why people are concerned. And then so you've got an irregular process, and it's going on right now during a pandemic when people can't participate and have public comment. I think that's just kind of a perfect recipe for the firestorm that's been whipped up specifically in Killearn Estates, because you do have 3,800 residents and 3,800 homes, and have been there a long time, and they expect to maintain and protect that quality of life. And you certainly want your county commissioner or your city commissioners to be advocating for you, at the very least, bringing you to the table and listening to your concerns and making sure that there is some compromise reached.
And Brian, that's the poke in the eye. Our current representative was not helpful with the Killearn corridor in 16, nor in the Northeast Gateway. City Commissioner Matlow has been attempting to look out for us, and with reason, and he fights for support all the time, and that's not the way it should be. I think your district, the fourth district,
Yes, ma'am.
represents about 15 neighborhoods. Two
Oh
of them had
gosh.
a higher. It's about
Probably
15
more than
neighborhoods,
that. Yeah.
but it's a contained area. But two of them had to hire outside consultants to fight
Mhm.
what their county district representative should have been there to help them with. So
Exactly.
it's bad enough if you can't support a particular group of constituents for whatever particular reason, but to work against them and not to even give them a heads up is a real shame. Back in the old days when I first moved here, there'd be a couple of commissioners that wouldn't be able to, they didn't represent us either, but they had the
Mhm.
decency to call well ahead in the early stages and say, look, I'm not going to be able to vote with you on this. For sometimes they told me why, and sometimes they didn't tell us why,
Mhm.
but at least they'd give us advance notice so we could have a fighting chance to at least bring the issue with some facts and have some time to do our homework and at least have a chance to appeal to somebody. And I feel that that's diminished greatly. And I think we deserve better. Our tax base is pretty big out here. And
Mhm.
I think we get very little portion of that. I'm not saying we should be better than, but we should certainly be equal to, and we should certainly be we deserve representation out here. Our taxes are crazy. I don't want our taxes to discourage young families from moving in, and I don't want our fixed income residents to be taxed out of their homes. Gosh, that's not fair either. This road thing coming through has been scary enough for everybody. Gosh,
Mhm.
is the greatest investment I ever made, going to diminish, and where am I going to go? What am I going to do? I mean, it all has, some of these stories that I've listened to, it almost brings you to tears, and that shouldn't be. So, you know, where does the runaway spending stop? Where does the
Mhm.
runaway spending that can put a little bit of a lid on our taxes for a while, especially given the crazy 2020 we've just been through?
Yeah. My opponent likes to say that he's held the line on taxes in his tenure, and that the county operates at a lower budget than it did when he was first elected. And although that may be true, the share of the tax burden that is borne by the residents of Northeast Tallahassee has not been held. My property taxes go up every year. They've probably gone up $500 or $600 in the 5 years I've lived in my current house. And when you're paying $5,000 a year, $6,000 a year in property taxes, that's a lot of money. And so I think that, again, I've made this point many times on the campaign trail, and that is, we have 12 local elected officials. You have 5 city commissioners who are elected at large to represent the whole city. And then you have 7 county commissioners. 5 of them are in districts, and 2 of them are for the whole county. Well, none of those 7 people live north of Killearn Estates, which is, I think, really indicative and sort of speaks to the notion that it's hard to advocate for a community if you're not driving on the roads every day, if you're not shopping in the stores, if you're not playing in the parks, and that's a whole nother issue when we talk about equitable distribution of taxpayer dollars. One of my big issues is we don't really have active ball fields in Northeast Tallahassee. We certainly don't have them in
That's
District
on my
4.
list. That's
Yeah,
on my
yeah.
whiteboard.
Right. And when you talk about quality of life and protecting quality of life, you know, the District 4 county commissioner, really, that person can only be elected by people who live north of I-10 and more or less between Miccosukee Road and Meridian Road, which means all of Tallahassee's big prolific neighborhoods like Killearn Estates and Killearn Lakes. And then you mentioned some earlier problems with Summerbrook and Ox Bottom. You have these very established, affluent communities and neighborhoods who have had development interests just really rammed down their throat over the past couple of years, to the extent that they've had to hire their own consultants, like you mentioned, to sort of protect them and protect their interests from their own government. And really, that buck should stop with your county commissioner. And those are reasons that I got into this race. I mean, aside from recreational infrastructure and parks, just the desire to have somebody that represents and fights for the interests of our neighborhoods. our HOAs, but not just our HOAs. I mean, the families and the retirees who make up these neighborhoods, who pay the big taxes. Man, your first and primary role, in my opinion, as a county commissioner, should be to represent those folks' interests. Now, you may lose on a vote. You may say, you know what, I'm not going to vote on this development interest, and I'm probably going to lose. I may lose the vote to the other commissioners, but I'm certainly going to advocate for my neighbors in my community and my constituents. The only people that can vote for me are people who live in District 4. So I think that somewhere along the line, that has gotten out of whack. And our current county commissioner, I would agree with you. And I don't think it's unfair. He thinks it's unfair to criticize that. I don't think it's unfair to criticize it. I think it's totally fair. I think he has definitely dropped the ball. He is not necessarily representing the interests of regular, everyday people in Northeast Tallahassee, and that's pretty obvious to the folks who are paying attention.
Yeah, yes, it has become clear, and it's been very disappointing. And I was all excited that a candidate was expressed an interest in us. So I asked no, seriously, I am not representing the board. I'm a resident of Killearn Estates. I care about Killearn Estates. I care about my property values and my property taxes. And that's why I'm here. But anyway, and very few ever take the time to listen to what we have to say, even just for consideration. So I asked some of my neighbors, I said, well, I'm going to talk to Brian Welch today for just have a neighbor conversation. What are your concerns? What are your interests? And a community center was one of them. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you something about that. One of the reasons it's particularly necessary for us is because the monies that we might have been able to set aside from our very modest annual dues of $150 a year is make more of our passive parks, active parks for older children activities. Mm-hmm. Playground equipment. I was the maintenance chair for most of my 2-year term on the board. We did green infrastructure, major restoration, a huge collaboration with the city that redid Shamrock South Park. I've utilized free rain garden grants and all kinds of ways to stretch $1, free mulch from the city when they have available to try to keep our parks as attractive and viable as possible with on a shoestring. Mm-hmm. We had a young boy or an older little boy or a preteen write a letter to the Killearn Homes Association recently. It really moved me. It was, but anyway, he and some of his pals were talking and they wanted to establish a youth board and promote and try to find ways and lobby Killearn to build out more activities for the older kids. Because it's true, our parks are only for the little babies, the little kids, or a half basketball court. Well, those things cost a lot of money. And every time I see another problem or a problem that I thought was resolved, like the gateway extended, now we have to fight a comp plan amendment for crying out loud. I see any chance of that going to, it seems like you have to hire access to fight for a seat at the table. And so it bothers me because those dollars could go to those children's activities so they can play in their backyard and attract more young families when our empty nesters want to downsize and not spend a lot of money on the lawn and everything else, and whatever reasons they want to downsize and travel as they've earned. I want to provide that for our residents. That's really that's my passion, is making it a beautiful place to live. Flowers, agility courses for the kids. We do the tennis courts. So it's not only are these subjects that I'm fighting over my head, I hate to see that that's where our funds have to go, but it's the only way we have a fighting chance at all.
Yeah. And to your point, for many, many years, the Killearn Kiwanis Club met at Killearn Country Club. Yeah. And then, and I'll tell you in a second about my history with Killearn in terms of I got married at the Killearn Country Club.
I heard a rumor and I was going to ask you to tell us.
Yeah. So back in the day when I was hanging out at the Killearn Country Club when I was 18 years old, it was a very thriving and bustling place. And the Killearn Kiwanis Club met there every Thursday morning and had breakfast. And now as a teacher at Childs, I sponsor our Key Club, which is sponsored by the Killearn Kiwanis Club. And so we would go there and have breakfast with them once a year. And they were still meeting in the Killearn Country Club dining room all these years later. And then, of course, Killearn had some problems. They had to close down their dining facilities. And so the Kiwanis Club tried to meet at the Bradfordville Community Center and couldn't, because it was just the facilities were so poor. And so I think that is an example of how, you know, we have our community center in this part of town is the Bradfordville Schoolhouse, which is a 150-year-old schoolhouse.
Oh,
It's
that's
400.
it? That's our community center?
That's it. It's 400 square feet. It's not very big. It's been moved a couple times. It's just not very suitable for the needs of our community organizations. And so the Killearn Kiwanis Club meeting at Killearn Country Club, I think, is a great example of why we've been taken for granted in Northeast Tallahassee for so long, because we are the affluent part of town. Our elected leaders just say, well, you know what, if you guys don't have a community center, you can just meet at Killearn Country Club. Well, Killearn Country Club is a private facility. It really should not. Yeah, it should not be Killearn Country Club's responsibility to provide safe enough facilities for our Kiwanis clubs or our Rotary clubs or any other groups that want to utilize the facilities. And so then you look at parks, it's the same thing. Killearn has 10 parks, but they're all private parks. They're for the residents. You know, there's no ball fields that are suitable with restrooms and concession stands. And that's the kind of stuff that a growing part of town really needs. And here, all these years later, it's been neglected. And so I think, to your point, that's a good example of how, you know, when we put this burden of trying to fight for neighborhoods on the neighborhoods themselves, you guys have to expend very precious resources to hire engineers or get studies done to try and, you know, prove your point to your elected officials who really should be working for you. They should be who you are. You elect them to do that for you. So I think that's a great point. And then back to the Killearn Country Club thing, if you'll indulge me just a second. I did work there in 1998 to probably 2001. I met my wife at the Killearn Country Club when we were 18 years old, and we got married on the golf course in 2003, literally on the golf course. So I have a great affinity for Killearn Country Club. You know, again, back in those days, it was a thriving place, and it's starting to be that way again. And I talked about this with Dr. Givens and Danielle, you know, how it's so important that Killearn Country Club survives and thrives for the whole neighborhood. And I'm hopeful with the new ownership group that they're going to be able to do that. From what I can tell, they are doing that, and there's a lot of young families that are rejoining the club and kind of, you know, injecting some life into it. So I certainly love the Killearn Country Club. It's near and dear to my heart, and I hope it survives and thrives, and I hope that the Killearn Kiwanis Club, you know, can get to using it again. But that still doesn't take away from the fact that we desperately have been under-provided a community center in Northeast Tallahassee.
Really, I think it's well overdue, and it would really help us while, you know, we have to spend our funds on, you know, a seat at the table as major stakeholders in a lot of these issues.
Yep, no doubt. And, you know, it's the Welaunee thing it's such an elephant in the room, and the neighborhoods that are bordering up to that big property, you know, it's a scary time, especially if you feel like you don't have anybody fighting for you. And so, you know, I don't want to pander to people, but I say all the time, you know, my special interests are going to be neighborhoods. You know, and that really is what your interest should be. You know, the Killearns and the Oxbottoms and the Summerbrooks, those folks are who you should be fighting for. And really, if neighborhoods acted and thought of themselves as special interests, they'd probably get treated differently. But
that's a very good point.
Unfortunately, you know, people don't see things that way, and the individuals and entities that can bundle up a bunch of money and give to politicians, I don't think there's any secret as to why those politicians seem to never vote against those interests. And that's unfortunate, but I think that a lot of folks realize that it's time for a change. And you know, our campaign has had a lot of success, and we've got a lot of support, and it's really humbling to me. It started out kind of as a small kind of personal project of my own, a venture, and it's kind of grown into a bigger thing. And as I talk to folks like you and other neighbors and people in the community, it really encourages me and puts some wind in my sails, because I'd be lying to you if I told you I wasn't getting a little tired this is a very, very difficult process running for office and putting yourself out there. There's a lot of, I haven't been to any of my kids' baseball games this year because almost every night of the week I'm doing these kinds of things. So, it really encourages me to speak with folks like yourself, and I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing with me your concerns.
Sure. And I want to make it real clear that I don't think anybody in Killearn feels that it has to be 100% whatever 3,800 property owners want. It's
Hmm.
just, it's a willingness to invite the stakeholder to the table instead of having to pay to fight for a seat at the table,
Hmm.
and see if some reasonable compromise can be worked out. What are your main concerns? Here's what we have to do for growth, or here's what these property owners are entitled to do, and what are your concerns and the impacts, and just have a dialogue. Oh my God, rocket, wait, headline, have a dialogue.
Right.
Really at the table. Once we fought for a seat at the table on the Northeast Gateway, Brian, I have to tell you, it was one of the most, this sounds so queer. It was one of the most rewarding experiences to sit down with our team, with only a traffic task force of 3, and Blueprint. And we sat at a big conference table. This is before COVID. And we
Hmm.
sat at the big conference table, and we had boards and markers. And we just said, okay, here's the 2 sides of the, and it was real basic. It was, here's where this person is and this where this person is. And little by little, it got less and less adversarial, until it was a great spirit of cooperation between the residents and the staff and the officials of government working together. And that's how it should be.
Hmm.
Everybody gave some, everybody got some, and it worked out, and it was an enjoyable process. I think we grew to where we really trusted each other. So to see it bubble up again is extra disheartening after the good experience that we all shared over
Yeah,
there.
absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I mean, I've said it many times. It's not about, it's about balance. I mean, neighbors and neighborhoods, they're not, there's been this narrative going around that there's people that just want to stop growth. And I'm like, that's not true. And that's disingenuous. And it kind of is insulting to the people who really take the time and effort to engage the neighborhoods, that take the time to go sit at the table and really try to come up with a solution that everybody can live with. And then just to say that those folks don't want anything in their backyard, or this NIMBY attitude, right? Or they just want it to stop and they want to close the gate behind them now that they're living in the affluent, nice part of town and nice schools. And that's not true at all. I think that's just very frustrating when I hear that,
Two
because the
two little
reality,
things. Oh,
yeah,
sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say the reality is, the people in Northeast Tallahassee pay, like I said, 35% of the taxes. We're 35% of the voters in the whole county. These are some of the best. And I wrote an opinion piece about this when I first just started thinking about running for county commission. And I said that, Northeast Tallahassee is taken for granted.
Yeah.
We're one of the best communities, and not just in Tallahassee, but really in the state. I mean, you talk about the best schools, some of the best, most thriving businesses, churches, neighborhoods, real estate markets. Restaurants are, before COVID, obviously bursting at the seams. And so Northeast Tallahassee is a thriving and beautiful community, and it's made up of really wonderful people and strong families. And that is the strength of the community. There's not a selfishness associated with this mentality. It's really it's about engagement, accountability, and responsiveness. And that's what we want from our elected officials.
Yeah, and I want to be fair about this too. Not all developers are bad. There are
No.
developers that, if not, and sometimes it's the small developer that doesn't have the big deep pockets of the big corporations coming in, that really want to create value and add pretty
Yeah.
amenities in addition to them building something. So, that's just to be fair about that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
I remember back early on, shortly after I'd moved here, after some of the road, after the initial the road things that were going on, um, I was asked to be the governmental liaison volunteer job at the KHA. And I was at the mediation table that helped bring all the stakeholders that brought Roberts and Montford schools at the corner.
Hmm.
There were a lot of people who didn't want that. It involved sidewalks. It was, it was a signal. There was a very complicated issue. And there was distrust. There was just distrust on everybody. If I listed all the stakeholders, there was distrust from everybody.
Mhm.
And we worked carefully and thoughtfully and listened and brought everybody around to have something, enough, the extra schools that we needed up here, thinking ahead. We really needed them then, but really thinking ahead to bring that. So that brought a convenience and a value, and we still, we curbed a lot of fears and helped address the issues that the stakeholders had, and it worked. It can work. So there are some real good success stories out there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I know a lot of builders. This is, again, when people try to frame the argument like this is an anti-development or anti-build or not in my backyard kind of, it really is not. And it does a disservice to the fact that, a lot of our builders are really hardworking people and they do a lot of good in our community. They don't just build things. They're not building just houses and business offices. They're building lifestyles and they're building opportunity. And I think everybody appreciates that. It's just about balance and it's about communication and compromise. And I just think people feel like, I certainly feel like that balance has been thrown out of whack for whatever reason. And it's time to this is an opportunity for folks really in Northeast Tallahassee to kind of bring some balance back. I am not anti-development. I am not anti-developers, but I do want to protect the interest of established neighborhoods and protect our quality of life. And that's been my thing since the beginning. And I saw a lot of what was going on in Northeast with not just Killearn, but Summerbrook and Ox Bottom as well, who had similar issues. And so, I commend our development community. I mean, it provides a lot of jobs in our community. Everybody acknowledges that, and that is absolutely great and fair. We want to keep doing that, but we just have to have balance. And when neighborhoods get told that potential densities are going to go from 4,500 to 12,000, that is very concerning, and people have a right to be concerned about that stuff.
Yeah, and there should be a quality of life on both sides. So, oops, oh, I'm sorry. That's my ring. That's my ring doorbell. That's my ring doorbell. Someone's something triggered it. We'll find out. I'll find out soon enough.
Well, hey, you know what? Thank you so much. I know I'm probably keeping you from dinner. I think we've had a great and robust conversation. I appreciate you, Miss Gloria, so much for taking the time to talk with me. I can promise you, if I am privileged enough to win this election, I will be this available for anybody. I'll be coming to your HOA meetings and I'll be listening to you guys and I'll be making sure that your voices are heard and we do have a seat at that table, because again, it's not about me, it's about us. I lived in Killearn. I live in Northeast Tallahassee. My mother still lives in Killearn, actually. I own a house with my mother in Killearn. She lives in the Villages of Killearn, actually, if you know where that is, over there off Shannon Lakes. Yep.
I thought by the lakes.
Yeah, my grandmother actually, back in the day when I worked at Killearn Country Club, my grandmother was one of the first residents in the Greens of Killearn, which you probably are familiar with too, those little houses in there. So we've lived my family has lived all over Killearn Estates. My wife, actually, I haven't mentioned this, actually grew up in Killearn Estates. Her parents built their house on Shamrock in 1986 and still live there. And so my wife literally grew up in Killearn Estates and went and played golf at Killearn Country Club when she was a kid and all that. So it's not about me. It's about us and our community and protecting our community and our quality of life and giving our folks a seat at the table. And I certainly appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and express those issues with me. Is there anything else? You have any questions or anything for me, or anything else?
No, I think thank you. I think you've given the residents of Killearn Estates a lot to think about in considering their votes for November 3rd. And again, while I do sit on the KHA board, I'm here as a resident tonight. And yes. I think you two, with the vibrant job that the new owners of the country club are doing, you might want to think about celebrating a milestone anniversary back out there on the groomed course.
Oh, I think that's a great idea. I'll tell you what, On November 8th, I will be celebrating my 17th wedding anniversary. So 17 years ago on November 8th, I got married on the first tee box of the North Course, which is actually no longer there, but that's unfortunate. Well, I guess it's still there. It's just not maintained. But yes, I am looking forward to Killearn Country Club's further growth and redevelopment. And certainly I'm looking forward to Killearn Estates, continuing to be a thriving and bustling community for all types of people. And I
Thank you.
welcome
We do
everybody.
too.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Miss Gloria. You have a great Saturday night. Thank you so much for sparing some time for me. I really, really appreciate it.
I enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better.
Yes, ma'am. Awesome. Thank you. Please reach out anytime you have any questions or concerns. And we got about 10 days, I think, until November 3rd. And depending on the outcome on that day, and we might be seeing more of each other. But either way, I have certainly enjoyed getting to know you. And thank you again so much for speaking with me.
Thank you. Best of luck to you.
Thank you, Miss Gloria. Have a great evening. Good night.
Night now. Night.